Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. La'asok b'divrei Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah. La'asok b'divrei Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah. So good evening. Again, we're continuing with class, and as always, before we start, take a little bit of money, put it in your charity box or whatever you keep for charity so that you can give it away. Not to the synagogue, but to someone on the street or another cause. But this is so the angels of charity will bless our learning as we study tonight. Okay, so last week we had dealt with Kabbalah and Jewish meditation and mysticism. And again, if you have an issue or question, you can email events@nersimcha.org and they'll forward it to me. You can email me directly at rabbi@nersimcha.org if you have questions or comments about it. Tonight we're going to start a little bit into a little bit more modern history in some ways and theology. So two things happen in Judaism in the 18th century in Europe, and they're incredibly important. They really are. The first is there's this man named Moses Mendelssohn. He lives, born in 1729, dies in 1786. And he is the founder of what we call the Haskalab Movement. So Jews have dispersed. They're all over the world. And as often happens, we start to assimilate with the cultures we're around. Do you think of yourself living in America as an American who happens to be Jewish or a Jew who happens to live in America? Well, more and more, as we assimilate, we start thinking of ourselves as our nationality not being Jewish, but being the nation where we live. So today, many Reform Jews or secular Jews will say that they are Americans who happen to be Jewish, as opposed to a more observant Jew who will say, I'm a Jew who happens to be living in America, and I have loyalty to both. Well, that's not new. That's been happening since the destruction of the Second Temple and since we've had this disbursement, this diaspora. So what happens by the time you get into the 1700s is you have this movement that starts in Germany, and Moses Mendelssohn is really the leader of it in many ways, called the Enlightenment movement. We are enlightened, just like the rest of the world is about, we're enlightened and we're discoverers and we're adventurers and we're explorers and we're coming up with science and we're men of science and all this. Well, theologically, you get the same thing. And the Enlightenment movement becomes what is known now as Reform Judaism, transfers into that. Because the Jews, led by Mendelssohn and others, Germans, it takes place in Germany, they believe that they are Germans first who happen to be Jewish. And they want to assimilate with the other Germans. So they decide to change their prayer services. Remember, we talked a long time ago about the fact that in Parsha Shoftim, that you should go to the judges of your time, etc. And they start to make judgments for their time, and they decide that they're going to have their prayer services, their theology, be more German than Jewish. As an example, they, in many cases, even had Shabbat services on Sundays. They stopped doing a lot of the prayers in Hebrew, and they did them in German instead. And that becomes a whole movement, and they start to reform Judaism. That's what they claim that they're doing. Excuse me, Orlando, would you be kind enough to ask it to quiet down over there if you can, please? So they start to reform Judaism. And they call everyone who's not them, they call Orthodox. So if you're an observant Jew, you call you Orthodox, and they're calling themselves reformers. This happens in the 18th century. As I say, they start doing Shabbat even on Sundays. They stop wearing tefillin. They stop wearing yarmulkes. They stop having tzitzit, the knots on our talit. They stop having payas coming from their hands. They want to appear like scientific men of Germany, intellectuals of Germany. And in so doing, they assimilate and lose much of their culture. So they call themselves Reform. They call everyone else Orthodox. And this is where you start getting the movements that we now call denominations in Judaism. And just to fast forward a little bit, in the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, you have a bunch of Jews who say that they're not as observant as the people who are called Orthodox, but they're more conservative than those German reformers. And that becomes known as the conservative movement. So most people seem to think that everyone was Orthodox, and then that got watered down and they became conservative, and that got watered down and they became Reform. It's not the way. Everyone was a Jew, no matter how observant you were or not. And then people said, okay, we are reforming Judaism. and everybody else was Orthodox, and then conservative came up in the middle as a result because they're more conservative than reformers. So that's going on in Germany in the 18th century. And that's one big, big development that changes Jewish theology, Jewish practices. I want to point out something first of all. In a 3,700-year history, that means that it's less than 300 years since the Reform movement started in Germany. We're talking 7%, 5%, whatever it is, of our history. So the idea of movements really is a modern invention. Prior to Mendelssohn and the German Reformed Jews, everyone was Jewish. And for many of us, we believe that the movements have only separated Judaism in a bad way, as opposed to just saying, we're trans-denominational, we're post-denominational, like our synagogue is. We use a conservative prayer book. We do a lot in English, and we also teach Orthodox theology and traditional authentic Judaism. So it's post-denomination. It didn't matter to Hitler what denomination you were. It won't matter to the Mashiach, to the Messiah, God willing, he or she comes in our time, what denomination you are. And many of us have now moved into, and many new communities have moved into the idea of being post-denominational or trans-denominational. We're not attached to the Reform or the Conservative or the Orthodox movement. We realize it's all Judaism. But so that's going on. This reforming starts happening in the 18th century. Teacher, Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer. He's born roughly 1700, dies roughly 1760. And he becomes known as the Baal Shem Tov. Baal means master, Shem means name, Tov means good, the master of the good name. He was a storyteller. He was a miracle worker. He was an enlightened being, however you want to describe it. And what the Baal Shem Tov taught was that what God really wants from us is not just our prayers. That means nothing. God doesn't want us to just do without any intention, without any kavanah, without any heart. What God wants is devakut. Devakut means to cleave. So not to view God as humans and God, or even humans and God, but to view it like this. That God wants us to cleave with all of our heart and all of our soul. And if you're not praying with all of your heart in that moment, then the prayer isn't real. And so the Baal Shem Tov starts to teach people to open their hearts, open their souls to the beauty that is Judaism, to the richness that is Judaism, to the traditions and the deeper values and meanings. He's a great mystic, a great Kabbalist. He understands all these different mystical traditions, and that gets incorporated into how he preaches to the people. Like a different preacher 2,000 years ago, the Baal Shem Tov does a lot of it with storytelling, but with a really deep understanding of the mystical intentions, the depths of our prayers. So he founds this movement, which becomes known as Hasidism, a Hasid, a pious one who follows him. At the same time, there are the others who disagree with that, who don't want to take all that time, who don't want to have all that passion. They think it's too, to use modern terms, too much like a Baptist revival meeting, right? It's too happy, it's too joyous, it's too passionate. And those are called the Misnagdid or the Mitnagdim. And a Mitnagdid, they want to just do what they're supposed to do. Baal Shem Tov is more concerned with the kavanah, the intention. Mitnagdid more concerned with the keva, the structure. So the Baal Shem Tov, through his storytelling and his nigunim, his songs, and nigun is a song without words, without lyrics. So he starts singing and dancing, this ecstatic form of prayer. This becomes what becomes the Hasidic movement. Now, the leader of each group of Hasids would be called a Rebbe, not a rabbi, but a Rebbe. The difference between a Rebbe and a rabbi is kind of like the difference. It's kind of analogous to how a person in India might view their guru. Your Rebbe is not only so knowledgeable and so wise, but you have faith if you're one of his Hasids that your Rebbe knows more about your soul than you do. And so his guidance you take without hesitation. You surrender your presence, you surrender yourself to the Rebbe so that he can guide you to really find and explore your deeper self and to always be present. This is what the Baal Shem Tov starts to do. And he does it through storytelling. And there's an old saying that if you believe every story about the Baal Shem Tov is true, you're a fool. If you believe none of them are true, you're a bigger fool. His name was Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer. Israel, the son of Eliezer. He was a hidden mystic. People thought he was stupid, actually, when he was young, because he was seeing and experiencing and knowing so much. And there are thousands of stories about him. One of the great books to explore is this book, Tales of the Hasidim. It has a lot of stories about the Baal Shem Tov, but also about other Rebbes after he dies. I'm going to go into that in a moment. This is another great book by Yitzhak Buxbaum, The Light and Fire of the Baal Shem Tov. Another wonderful book about his history and all these different stories. And you can see there's all these different, from 1 paragraph to 5-page stories about the Baal Shem Tov. Martin Buber wrote a lot about the Baal Shem Tov. Just this amazing character. So maybe the easiest way is to tell a little bit of stories about him. There is a story of the Baal Shem, who's also sometimes called the Besht. Again, remember Rambam was for Rabbi Moshe ben Moshe. This is Besht Baal Shem Tov. And there's a story about him that one night he was dreaming. And he had a really tough day with his community. They just weren't getting what prayer is really about. The prayer is to lighten our way, to enlighten us, to show us where we are and show us the way. And he had a dream. And like in all these dreams, all these Hasidic stories, we were to imagine we are the ones dreaming. We're the ones having the dream. And in this dream, the Baal Shem Tov felt his soul pulled out of his body, come out of his body. And it was foggy and it was cold. And he couldn't see anything. And he tried to speak, but he couldn't find a voice as his soul was pulled out, wandering through this fog. And again, he tried to speak, but he had no voice. Finally, he came to the edge of a cliff, and the fog, the mist, disappeared. There he was on top of this cliff, and far below was his village. Floating above, midair, this was a dream after all, was a circular ridge, and a man walking on this circular ridge in circles. And the Baal Shem Tov tried to cry out and tried to say something, but he could not find his voice. Because you see, this circular ridge was actually really dangerous. On the inside of this ridge was a hellfire, an inferno. And on the outside was the cold abyss of space. But this man was walking in circles on this circular ridge, just tootling along as if it was wide enough to drive horses through. The Baal Shem Tov tried to cry out, but he could not find a voice, when suddenly there was a flash of lightning. And in this flash of lightning, this man on this circular ridge, he saw that he was walking in circles. He saw that he was on a narrow ridge, and he saw the peril, the danger on both sides. The fire on the inside, the cold abyss of death on the out. And the man started to teeter and to totter and close to falling, and still the Baal Shem Tov could not find a voice. As the man started to fall into this inferno, and he caught himself, and he was about to fall into the cold abyss of space, when suddenly the Baal Shem Tov found his voice. And in a loud, clear voice, he yelled at the man, he yelled, "Fly!" And the man flew. See, the lightning wasn't meant to scare the man, but to show him the circles that he had always been walking in, to show him the dangers that were always present, and to wake him up to another way of being. Prayers like that lightning, so the Baal Shem Tov would teach. These are the kind of stories we have of the Baal Shem Tov. One of his disciples was once always really dogmatic with his students. And he didn't want to become a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov. He didn't respect the storytelling that the Baal Shem Tov was so passionate. And this disciple, ultimately disciple, came up to him, Yaakov Yosef, and he said, was about to talk to the Baal Shem Tov, when he heard the Baal Shem Tov meditating, "Give the horse more rein, give more rein to the horse, let them run." And through this, the man who became his disciple, this rabbi, realized that he was holding on to his community too tightly, saying, "You have to do this, you can't do this." And he was letting go of his compassion. He needed to let the spirits of this community run like horses and just use the reins to guide, not to control. There are thousands of stories of the Baal Shem Tov. And he becomes the founder of what is known as modern Hasidism. When he dies, it splits into a couple of other people become Rebbes. And then that each community, when a Rebbe dies, someone else may take part of the community and become the Rebbe of that community, and so on. There are a couple of very famous Rebbes I just want to briefly go over. One is my personal favorite, Ramachan of Bruslov. Rabbi Nachman, this is The Lost Princess and Other Tales, Kabbalistic Tales of Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Nachman was in Bruslov. He was the Rebbe. He was a great storyteller, a great mystic. He lived, the exact day, 1744 to 1810. And there's an old saying for those who are Breslov Hasidim that everyone should have two Rebbes. Your Rebbe and Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Nachman taught with these amazing stories that would be entertaining to children and yet would have deep, deep Kabbalistic meanings if you knew how to explore them and if you let them move through you. Rabbi Nachman teaches the story that many of you heard during high holidays of the Fixer, our musical director Matt Gurman's favorite story. You can see it online. I think it's on both YouTube and Facebook on our page from this past high holidays. His stories had lots of different meanings. Often there's a lost princess, which is about the presence of God being lost in the physical world. Often it's about redeeming her. It's how we have to redeem God. There are many small stories that he wrote. I want to recommend, if you want to explore Rabbi Nachman, to go to a website called azamra.org, azamra.org. Azamra. My friend and teacher, Rabbi Ram Greenbaum in Jerusalem, it's his site. Huge amounts of material about Rabbi Nachman, translations of Rabbi Nachman, interpretations of Rabbi Nachman. Again, that's azamra.org. Rabbi Nachman would tell long stories, and he would tell short stories. Short story might be the story of the chandelier. Of a king was very proud of his son. He sent his son to go learn skills. And his son went away for many years and came back and said, "Dad, I have learned how to make the greatest chandelier in the universe." And so his father summoned all of the nobles and everyone else and all the great chandelier makers in the kingdom. And the son made of this beautiful chandelier. And the first chandelier maker, who was very, very famous, came up and he said, "It's a perfect chandelier except for one thing. That little piece of crystal right over there, it doesn't let the light shine through." And then another man came up and he said, "That's the most perfect chandelier I've ever seen, except there's no candle there. There's darkness and there should be a candle." And another man came up and he said, "This is the most perfect chandelier I've ever seen, except I can see that it doesn't let the light really come out. It focuses the light other directions than where it needs to be." Everyone had a complaint, one complaint, and it was always different. So the father said to his son, "Son, I sent you all these years to go learn a skill. What is this? You come back and everyone finds one thing. You made a piece of garbage." The son says, No, you don't understand, Dad. That's why it's the perfect chandelier. Because it highlights whatever one mistake someone has in their soul. The first man, he has a bright light, but he clouds it. The way he speaks, the way he deals with people, puts a cloud and they can't receive his bright light. He said, the second man, he's got all this light inside of him, but he doesn't let all of it come out. This third man, he's more interested in showing off than he is in interacting with people one-on-one, because this is a teaching chandelier. That's a Rabbi Nachman story. There are many, many stories, and they're beautiful. And in other Hasidic communities, when one Rebbe would die, another Rebbe would take his place. Someone else would be appointed, sometimes the son, sometimes a major disciple. In the Bruslov community, when Rabbi Nachman died, there's no other Rebbe. You still study Rabbi Nachman's work. You still let him move through you. It's the old joke, how many Bruslov Hasidim does it take to change a light bulb? The answer is none, because no light bulb will be as good as the first one. And so it's Rabbi Nachman is still so respected. People every year Rosh Hashanah go to his grave, say prayers. And it's a beautiful, beautiful tradition. Another great, one of my personal favorites was a man named Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak is this beautiful, loving, gentle Rebbe. There's a story of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak that one year he had this beautiful Passover Seder. He was so proud of himself. Sat back and he thought to himself, boy, I really nailed it this year. And he hears the Bakola voice of God. And it says to him, Rabbi Yitzchak, more pleasing to me than your Passover celebration was the celebration of Heim the water carrier. He doesn't know who Heim is. So the next morning, he sends some of his servants out to go find Heim. They travel. Everyone says, Heim the water carrier lives at the end of the village. They finally find him. Heim's a drunk. He carries water for a living. He lives very poorly at the end of the village, in the outskirts. So the Rebbe's servants knock on the door, and his wife answers. And they say, is Heim the water carrier here? And she says, Heim, that drunken sot, he's still hungover from last night. Say, can you get him? So they get Heim. Heim's like, kind of woozy from having had too much wine. And they say to him, the Rebbe wants to see you. So immediately he goes with them to go see the great Rebbe. And he sits in front of the Rebbe, very nervous, very scared. And Rebbe Levi Yitzhak says to him, Chaim, I'm celebrating Pesach. The evening before, did you gather 10 crumbs that you had hidden in your home, the last of the chametz? Did you gather it up, put it together, and light it on fire to burn all of your sins, burn all of these things away? Chaim goes, oh, Rebbe, I think I only got a couple of crumbs, and I got to be honest, I didn't burn them. I forgot. Chaim, says Levi Yitzhak, when you were dealing with in the Pesach Seder, and you talked about the 4 children, the wise, the wicked, the simple, the one unable to inquire, did you look and evaluate your own aspects of wisdom, wickedness, simplicity, unable to inquire, and even the one who does not know Passover? Did you make the comparisons to the 5 generations of Jews? Did you understand how it compares to the 5 mystical worlds? How it's the hay of God's name? Levi Yitzhak looks very embarrassed. Chaim, looks very embarrassed. He says, Rabbi, my Rebbe, I have to be honest. I did Seder last night, I guess, but I didn't even say anything about the 4 children, let alone a 5th hidden one. Levi Yitzhak looks. Chaim, how'd you celebrate Passover? Chaim looks at him. He says, Rebbe, let me tell you the truth. You may have heard this. I like to drink. I really like to drink vodka. Now, vodka is made of grain, as we all know. So I know I can't drink it for the week of Pesach, of Passover. I thought to myself, what should I do? I'm going to drink my week's allotment of vodka in one night, in one day before Passover Seder arrives. So in the afternoon, I drank all my week's worth of vodka that I would drink, just to make up. I didn't want to lose anything. While I did that, my wife, she prepared Passover, whatever she does. Came around 8, 9 o'clock at night. She wakes me up. She goes, Chaim, everyone else is doing a Seder. Where are you? Why are you not preparing for Passover? I looked at her. I looked at the beautiful table. I said, wife, what do I know? I'm a poor, uneducated yid. I'm a non-educated. I'm ignoramus as a Jew. What do I know from Passover? I know in Egypt we were slaves and God made us free. I know today we're slaves. I know God will make us free again. I have faith, total faith in that. And then I looked at the beautiful table and I looked at my wife, and in the candlelight, she looked so gorgeous. Rebbe, I took her and I danced as we danced for freedom and danced in God's name. And then I passed out. That's how I celebrated Passover, was dancing with my wife in joy and praising God's freedom. Rabbi Yitzhak looks at Chaim, the water carrier. He says, Chaim, may my place in heaven be next to you. Because he realized how holy Chaim really was. That's the story of Rabbi Yitzhak, a gentleness to his quality. Each of these Rebbe's have their own personality types. The Toldos, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef, was a little bit more harsh. Rabbi Yitzhak's a little sweeter, a little gentler. Zusia, the great Zusia, who traveled with his brother all over this great Rebbe. Zusia was always getting tortured. He was always getting picked on. But he always took it with faith. And when he said to someone, he said, look, when I go to heaven, they're not going to ask me, why was I not more like Moses or David or Solomon? They're going to say, why were you not a better Zusia? So he always tried to be the best Zusia he could be. You can see all of these tales tell about the Rebbe and also have teachings in them. There's one man named Rabbi Zalman of Lodi, and he is from Lubavitch. He's Lubavitcher is what they call it. And he writes a book called the Tanya. Now, the Tanya is a wonderful book, although it says in the Tanya that it is for the Jews of that time and place. But what he's writing, it says in the introduction to it, are for those Jews at that time and place. And it has a lot of Kabbalah, and it talks about different sefirot. You remember we spoke about sefirot, or energy centers. And specifically the three of them of Chokhmah, Bina, and Da'at, of wisdom, of understanding, of communication or knowledge. And because of those three energy centers that so much focuses on, Chokhmah, Bina, Da'at, the people who followed him became known as people of Chabad. CH from Chokhmah, Bet from Bina, the D from Dalet, from Da'at. And so he writes this book, and that becomes what is now today known as Lubavitcher or Chabad Hasidim. And each of these different groups have their own practices, their own minhagim, their own traditions. Chabad was passed Rebbe to Rebbe. There's not been a Rebbe that has happened since, Chabad has not accepted a Rebbe since Schneerson died of blessed memory a number of years ago. There's some people who think that Rabbi Schneerson was the Messiah, even. Some Chabad guys who do, and every year they gather together on the anniversary of his death and wait for him to return. And he was clearly an amazing, amazing teacher and man who his very gaze gave wisdom to you. His very breath and interaction with you gave wisdom. But so that when you think of Chabad, that's where it comes from. It comes from this one guy, Zalman of Loyola, his book, the Tanya, and that's where they get the name of Chabad from. And how it has been passed down. So there are all these different Hasidic groups. The Satmars, the ones who are from Satmar, are very exclusive. They don't let you just come on in, whereas the Chabad wants to invite you to come in. And just as an aside, when you see someone from Chabad passing out candles or saying, "Can you wrap tefillin?" The reason is because there's the tradition that when every Jew has wrapped, every male Jew has wrapped tefillin, or every female Jew has lit Shabbat candles, the Messiah will come. That's actually why they're doing it. It does not mean, and I want to be clear on this, your level of observance has nothing to do with your level of knowledge, wisdom, or understanding. And I have some very dear friends. In fact, one of the men who signed my ordination was Schwartzy, of blessed memory, Rabbi Shlomo Schwartz. Schwartzy was the founder of the first Chabad house at UCLA until he broke off from Chabad and created a Chai Center. I'm very close with the Rebbe and an amazing, amazing man and teacher and enlightened being, and a dear friend and teacher of mine for 40 years. From the time I was young, I was a teenager, young teenager. And so just because someone wears payas or black hat does not mean they are holier than you. They're not. Doesn't mean they're more knowledgeable than you. They may or may not be. Please don't make the assumption that because of how someone is dressed, they are or are not knowledgeable. In Talmud it says, do not judge by the flask, rather judge by what it contains. And, there are issues. Do not think that just someone, because they're wearing a black hat, that they are the be-all, end-all of Judaism. It's not true. It's not that their Judaism is more authentic than Moses Mendelssohn's. It's a different way of practicing. So I really want to make that clear, because there's a misconception often that, those Hasids, that's their practice. It does not mean that they are better or worse than anyone else. And I really want to be clear on that, because sometimes we fall in for the trappings as opposed to looking what the teachings are. So Chabad came out of that. And one of the things that Rabbi Schneerson had, was he really wanted them to do outreach. And that's where Chabad houses come from. And that concept comes from. And there's some terrific Chabad rabbis, and there's some Chabad rabbis like any other. Like there's some terrific Reform rabbis, and some not so terrific. There are some not so terrific Chabad rabbis. Don't judge all of them by one, either good or bad. I think that's an important thing. So Hasidism is based on this joyousness, the teaching, the devakut, the singing, the passion, the kavanah, meaning intention, as opposed to mitnagdid in the times of the Baal Shem Tov, the ones who were more rigid but with less joy. Today we have our own mitnagdid there, and it's a beautiful tradition. Mono-Orthodox aren't necessarily, they're more Orthodox, not more Hasidic, and there's a difference. Hasidic are very observant usually, but they don't have to be the same way. So those are some of the Rebbes. Now, I want to fast forward into the 20th century. because it's important to put this in perspective. So in the 18th century, in the 1700s, you start having Jews who then become split. So you have Reform Jews, who call everybody else Orthodox, and then a subsect of the Orthodox are called Hasids. Okay, everyone with me so far? By the time you get into the late 1800s, early 1900s, you now have conservative Judaism. So you have Reform and conservative and Orthodox, and then you have this Hasid that's a subsect of Orthodox, usually because they're observant. Often Hasidism or even Orthodoxy is difficult to access. A lot of Hebrew. It's in a foreign language. The prayers are very joyous, but only if you know what they mean. Sometimes it can really be challenging for people. And two amazing men come out of the 20th century, many amazing men, but two I want to speak about briefly tonight to understand Hasidism a little better. The first is a man named Rabbi Zalman Shakhtar Shalomi, Reb Zalman. Reb Zalman lives 1924 to 2014. This is one of his books, Wrapped in the Holy Flame, in which he has stories of different Hasidic masters. Reb Zalman was a brilliant scholar, brilliant man, and a loving man. I actually have the blessing. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm 95% sure that my book was actually the last book he ever endorsed, that he publicly endorsed in writing. A great teacher. And Zalman realized that there was a challenge in the 60s and the 70s. He realized that all the richness of Orthodox Judaism, observant Judaism, the wisdom of Talmud, the stuff we've been studying now together for months, all of the joy, the passion, the depth was inaccessible to a whole bunch of Jews who were basically hippies, who were dropping out and dropping acid and doing whatever else. And so Reb Zalman tries to renew Judaism by making the Hasidic teachings and presenting them in English, making them accessible. If you've ever seen a tallis that has a rainbow on it, a white tallis with a rainbow, that was actually his design. He made 5 of them, I understand, in knit originally before they were done in wool. And because he felt that Judaism is like a rainbow. Jews are like a rainbow. We're all different, but we all got to blend together and make it work to make the beauty of a rainbow. Zalman was this amazing, amazing teacher, very accessible. He was knowledgeable in many, many other spiritual traditions. He had carried a pipe in Lakota Sundance. He was initiated with the Yoruba people in Path of Ifa. He's very, very knowledgeable in many levels. Often was not respected in the Orthodox world because he had chosen to do outreach into the non-observant Jewish world. He wanted to bring the non-observant Jew back to Judaism, the secular Jew back to the richness of Judaism. He wanted to renew that. And at the same time, another man who was born in 1925, so a year later, but dies in 94, years before Zalman, was this man, Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach. Shlomo Carlebach was an amazing scholar. When he was young, and he came from a line of rabbis from Vienna, when he was young, they all thought he was going to be this great Chacham, this great wise Talmud teacher. And he decided that wasn't his purpose in life. He wanted to outreach to people. He loved music. In fact, he was very dear friends with Nina Simone. They were probably very, very close. If you're not sure of who she is, Google her, because she's probably the hippest, coolest jazz person, in the 50s and 60s and 70s. She's ultimately cool, Nina Simone. But they were very close. He wanted to reach out, again, like Zalman, to the Jews who were not affiliated with Judaism. He wanted to bring them back. And he did it through music. He took biblical verses and he put music to them. He was a folk singer and a guitarist. And he taught for men and women at the same time, which he would never do in the Orthodox world. And he really went out of his way to do good, to be loving to everybody. You go down the street, you'd see him and say, "Shalom, holy brother. Shalom, holy sister." And again, he was very much rejected by the Orthodox world because he chose to do outreach. Yet today, there are what are called Carlebachian synagogues. He made Hasidic Judaism accessible. He made the passion and the joy of Orthodoxy and Hasidic Judaism accessible to the kids who wanted to hear folk singing. He changed Judaism in our nation. in such a big way. He did multicultural work. In fact, at one point he did, I think it was a year-long tour where he taught himself and Yogi Bhajan Khalsa, who brought Kundalini Yoga to this country. They toured together teaching. Truly an amazing, enlightened man, and his teachings are phenomenal. His stories are beyond. They're so beautiful. His Hasidic stories, his songs. He took biblical verses and he made them into songs that we still sing today. B'Shem Hashem Meloko Yisrael. God is sent surrounding me, the angels of Israel, Michael on my right, Gabriel on my left, Uriel in front of me, Raphael behind me. It's a lullaby. So many songs. And in most Reform and conservative synagogues in today's world, certainly in America, you will hear Debbie Friedman songs. Debbie was a folk singer. Debbie doesn't get to become Debbie. Debbie doesn't get to do what she did, to make all these wonderful songs that are camp songs and are temple songs. She doesn't get to do that if it wasn't for Shlomo, who really opened the world to the idea of taking biblical teachings and verses and folk music to them, playing guitar. You can see thousands of videos of Shlomo online. A real amazing soul. I'll give you two of his teachings very quickly, as opposed to telling a story about him again. I think there's some stories online of me telling some Shlomo stories, but two very brief teachings. One was, it was either after the 67 war or the Yom Kippur War, I don't remember which, to be honest. He went to Israel and he said, look, to the Israeli government, he said, look, you got the greatest army for war in the world. What you need now is an army for peace. You know, he had, his shul was up in San Francisco, House of Brotherly Love, and he said, here's what I'm going to do. Let me bring over 50 of my musicians, 50 Jewish hippies, 50 holy Jewish brothers who sing and dance. We're going to go to every Arab home. We're going to knock on the door and we're going to say, look, we want to play music for your joyous events, for your simchas. No cost, no charge, just let us play. He goes, that will bring peace. We need an army for peace. Now, obviously, the government did not accept it, but what a beautiful idea. Maybe it would have worked. He really revitalized Judaism. Shortly before his death, he was interviewed by Michael Lerner at Tikkun magazine. In that last interview, which you can find online, he's asked the question, Reb Shlomo, what would you do to make Judaism, revitalize Judaism in America? And Shlomo says, well, I take all the big Jewish institutions and temples and I close them all down for a few weeks, then I'd open them back up with a whole new staff. Because we've lost our passion. It's true. It's sad, but it's true. All too often, Jewish synagogues are basically Protestant Christianity, only without the Jesus, and a little bit of Hebrew. The two are so concerned about social action, or so concerned about politics, as opposed to being concerned about God and Judaism. And passion, the joy of that. And so this was an amazing Hasidic teacher, Shlomo Carlebach. Again, this is a fabulous book called Shlomo's Stories. This is another beautiful book about him and his stories called Holy Brother. And I want to recommend those to you. They're fun. You can also buy CDs or you can listen to music online of Shlomo's. It's very beautiful stuff. It's very happy, a lot of happiness, and he's soulful, he's plaintive. And then too, there's a beauty to what he does. Real beauty. So these are some of the Hasidic teachers that we had. Schwartzy was my friend and teacher, as I said, for many years, just died a few years ago. He had broken off from Chabad. He didn't like a lot of politics or different things. Still was always very close with the Rebbe. He created something called the Chai Center, what he used to call a very nonprofit organization. It's now run by his son, Rabbi Mendel Schwartz, who's a tzaddik, such a righteous man. Mendel's a friend and an amazing human being, amazing man. Schwartzy was this great teacher, mystic. Rabbi David Wolpe of Sinai Temple, I think, phrased it really well. He said, there's some people who are so iconic that they only need one name. Bono, Cher, Madonna, Schwartzy, because Schwartzy was that. Everyone has their own Schwartzy story. remember having talked to him in a number of months. Just, our lives were busy. I was having a challenge. I had found out that I was involved in a synagogue where the treasurer had embezzled money, and the president of the temple knew about it and was covering for him. Probably was getting money as well. And I was ready to pack the whole thing in. And I get a text from nowhere, from Schwartzy, saying, "My holy rabbi, my holy student, my holy friend." He says, I still have it on old phone. He says, "Remember to have faith, and you give your teachings of Torah. And that needs to light the path for people. And don't get bothered when people succumb to the Yetzer Hara, their evil inclination." We all have Schwartzy stories. So again, that's Hasidism today. And today it's very different. I'm a big fan of Bruslov Hasidism, which you can find, often combined with Karlbach, with things on Shlomo Karlbach. There's the Happy Minyan that's in Los Angeles, is a great example of a fabulous religious community that really envelops, really engages with Rabbi Nachman, with Shlomo Karlbach's teachings and stories. And so this becomes the movement. But what Karlbach and Zalman do together is they begin the renewal movement. So you've got the Orthodox, which is subsect is the Hasids. You have the conservative, you have the Reform, and then you have renewal. It's like a circle. So renewal is kind of Hasidic Judaism light. It's in English, it's accessible. They have their own rabbinic school called Aleph. And it's the idea of it with these two men, these extremely knowledgeable men, is to start making the essence of Judaism, the authentic Judaism, accessible to people who may not know prayer, may not know history, may not know Hebrew, and to renew Judaism in that way. And so that becomes a movement as well. In some ways, it's very close to Reform, because it's not as devoted to liturgy and different things. In other ways, it's very close to Hasidic because its theology and its practices often are there. It doesn't have the same boundaries or constraints or controls or definitions as some of the other movements, but it is also its own movement. So this is kind of where Judaism starts going. And again, it all stems in the 18th century, where simultaneously you have the Reform movement starting with Haskalab and with Moses Mendelssohn and the German Jews. And on the other side of Europe, you have the Hasidic world with the Baal Shem Tov and Reb Dov Ber and the Toldos and all these, Nachman and all these different rabbis and rebbes. If you find this interesting, and Hasidic Judaism is based, the Tanya, they all are based, they really do have deep, deep roots in Jewish mysticism. I want to recommend this book. It's a great book to begin with. It looks like a big, thick book, but it's actually very short stories. As you can see, it's one paragraph to maybe 2 pages. But it will really give you a feel. This is Tales of the Hasidim. This is both volumes 1 and 2, and it's by Martin Buber. It'll really give you a feel of what Hasidic Judaism is about, and the meanings of it, and the joy of it, and the passion of it. And that's a passion I think we need in today's synagogues. Not a fake passion, not a false passion, but a real desire to devakut, to be cleaving with God. And that's, again, starts in the 18th century. And we still see the roots of both of Mendelssohn and the Reform world and the secular world, and of Hasidic Judaism in our world today. One of the challenges with the Reform world is as you assimilate and assimilate and assimilate, there comes a point where it becomes so watered down that is it even Jewish? Is there no advantage to being true to Jewish law? If everything is accepted because you're so far Reformed, where is it not even necessarily Jewish anymore? You hear the phrase tikkun olam a lot. That literally means reparation of the world. Many Reform synagogues take that as social action. Social action is important, but it's about our relationship with God. And sometimes God gets taken out of the equation in terms of in preference for politics or social action or whatever it may be. And all these are different movements, different communities. My suggestion is always to find the rabbis or the community and or their communities that you resonate to. Maybe you resonate to Hasidic Judaism. Maybe you like some of that joy, but you want it all in English, so you want to be around a renewal community. Maybe you want to be very secular, so you want to reform one. Maybe you want to be very observant and really delve into it. Find the community that you like. Ours, as in our many, are actually trans-denominational or post-denominational, as I said. Our synagogues like that, or Torah, I believe, is like that. Like Rabbi Finley, Rabbi Barron's Temple of the Arts is like that. There are a number of synagogues in the last 25 years that have been created that are not committed to one movement, but are more inclusive of all of Judaism, because there's beauty in all of it. And my suggestion is to find and explore. You can always know about a community by looking at its rabbi and seeing what he's written, because rabbis write. That's what they should do. And see their articles. See many Torah commentaries, not just newsletter bulletins, but see what are they writing? What was their book? What was their book or their books? What are the articles that they write? What are those different things? And find the community in the form of Judaism that most sings to your neshama, to your soul. And look at some of these different teachers, because I will tell you there are few beings in the world that their teachings are as loving as Karl Bach's, as wise as Reb Zalman's, or as rich as the Baal Shem Tov's and Hasidism. So we're going to stop there. If you have questions, you can email me at rabbi@nersimcha.org. You can email events@nersimcha.org. They'll get it to me. And next week, we're going to start going into some other things of early 20th century and late 19th century, the Mussar movement, Jewish psychoethics. We're going to start getting into modern Zionism and some of those things as well. But it's really important to see how all these different movements, these different denominations, are all part of one. Elu ve'elu, these words and these words are all words of Torah. And we should accept every Jew how they practice and teach and share and really come from a place of the heart, not just of the mind. Again, as always, thank you for being good to me, sitting with us and doing this. I hope to see you next week. This Wednesday night, we have Talmud and Tobacco at Stonehouse at 7:30. Synagogue provides cigars. You buy your own food and wine, and it's always a lot of fun. The topic this month is animal rights and the environment in Judaism. It's a celebration of Tu B'Shvat, the holiday, the New Year of the Trees, which is on January 27th this year, that evening. So come at 7:30 at Stonehouse this Wednesday, January 13th. We have Shabbat services, not this Friday. I think we're dark with the week after. And again, I hope to see you next Monday night. Thank you for being kind, and I hope this helps in some ways and get some of these books. Thanks. Take care.